Good morning, friends. It's Saturday, and I'm back with Chapter 16 of my upcoming book, Campaign at Fort Stix. Now it's time to grab a snack, dim the lights, and let me take you into the mists of time with a story I call Away Mission. It was late in the evening when we pulled into my uncle's farm in Wisconsin. I was wide awake, and had been since the road began going up and down like a roller coaster. I did not remember there being so many hills on the way to his house, and was already thinking this would be a great place to ride my skateboard. Carrying my bag into the house, my aunt stopped me on the porch and had me remove my shoes before entering the house. I thought this was a bit strange, but complied. When I stepped in, I barely had enough time to look around and see how immaculately clean the house was before being shuffled off to the laundry room. My uncle had me remove my clothes from the gym bag and put them and the gym bag into the washing machine. Then my aunt poked her head in to hand him something before disappearing again. I was instructed to remove my clothes and put them into the washing machine and was given a clean set of pajamas for the night. "Your clothes will be clean and you can have them back in the morning," my uncle said, smiling for the first time all evening. "Now, let's go have a drink and a little talk." He led me into the kitchen where I was given a small glass of milk and sat at the kitchen table. I wondered what we would talk about as he settled onto a chair next to me instead of across the table as I expected, and opened a bottle of beer. Taking a long drink, he set the bottle on a coaster and turned to me. "It's been a few years since we got to spend some time together, and I want you to know I was glad when your mother asked if you could come here for a stay," he smiled. "You have grown quite a bit, and I was a little surprised to see how tall you are now. I want you to know you're not here because of the fire today. I talked with your grandfather, and he explained there was no way for you to know that the grass was that dry." I looked up at him and smiled. I was glad he was not angry with me and did not think poorly of me. Of all my uncles, he was the one I always wanted to be proud of me. He was a very smart man, and a professor to boot. "I also saw your smoke can and got to taste the honey. That was smart, figuring out how to make a smoker from an oil can, and the honey was delicious," he said, taking a drink from his beer. "All in all, I think you have a good head on your shoulders and just lack direction. So, while you're here with us, I need you to follow a few simple rules." I nodded my head and paid attention. "When I'm at work during the day, follow Mark's lead in doing things. He knows what is allowed and what is not. Outside of that, do not do anything with fire, knives, or power tools unless I'm here to supervise. You're smart and get ideas. I know because I hear from the rest of the family when we talk all the time. If you want to do something that I mentioned, wait until after dinner and ask to talk to me about it. Then we can see, and I will supervise so you do not get into something unexpected like the fire today." I smiled and nodded. I was expecting a big long list of rules that would be written down for me to follow, but what he asked was pretty simple. I just had to deny my basic urges for fire, knives, and power tools, unless he approved and would watch me. That in itself made me want to comply, because at home, nobody cared about what I was doing, much less wanted to watch me do it and help if needed. Now, we've been gone on vacation for a couple weeks, and after looking at your garden, I think it would be very helpful if you were to help Aunt Pat weed and harvest in her garden tomorrow. Then, if needed, you can help Mark and Michael cut the grass and put the clippings in the mulch pile." He finished his beer and stood up, reaching down to squeeze my shoulder. "I think you will be just fine here with us. Now, come on, it's time to go to bed. You can bring your magazines if you like, but leave the skateboard in the laundry room until tomorrow." I followed him upstairs to the guest bedroom and watched as he turned on the bedside lamp and turned back the covers. I set my magazines on the nightstand and climbed into the bed. After saying goodnight, my uncle closed the door and left me alone for the night. The guest room was a little bit bigger than the front porch room on our farm. There was the bed where I lay, a desk with chair and lamp, and an easy chair with a lamp beside it for reading. Near the desk were two doors, which were directly across from the door we entered. Why were there two doors? Curiosity got the better of me, and I had to know what the doors were. Going to the first and opening it, there was a closet with a few changes of sheets for the bed in plastic bags on the shelf. Pretty normal. I closed the door and moved over to the second. When I opened the door, I was quite surprised to see a set of stairs leading up into the darkness. On one hand, it could be a very scary place up there. On the other hand, this was my uncle's house, and nothing was scarier than him when he wanted to be. If there were ghosts up there, I was sure they were wearing clean pajamas too. Feeling along the wall inside the doorway, I found a light switch and turned it on. A bulb in the room above glowed bright enough to illuminate the stairs. I ventured up slowly and poked my head above the ceiling. The room was as expected, clean, with not even a hint of cobweb or dust mote. I slowly climbed the stairs and stepped out onto the floor. Since it was an attic room, I knew there was a chance the floorboards would creak, and I did not want to give myself away. I did not know I was not supposed to be up here, but I also did not know if it was okay. Better safe than sorry. The room was finished in stained boards which gave off a golden tan hue. There was nothing in the room except for a single window in a dormer. Moving to the window, I leaned across the wide sill and looked out. There was a big tree not far from the window, which I knew was beside the driveway, and in the dim moonlight I could see the van. The moon hung in the sky just above the horizon, almost full, casting its soft light over the world. I could see rolling fields stretching into the distance, but not a single light anywhere. If there were any neighbors, they were obviously in bed or behind a hill. Taking a final look, I eased my way back downstairs, turned off the light, and climbed into bed. As I snuggled under the sheet and blanket, I was aware of how clean and fresh they smelled. It reminded me of my grandmother's house when I stayed with her. Everything here was clean and smelled fresh. At my house, things were rather dingy and always smelled of cigarette smoke. My uncle also smoked, but his house did not smell like mine. I fell asleep wondering about this. The next morning, I was up with the sun and wandered downstairs to see if anyone else was up. I found my aunt in the kitchen making pancakes on a griddle and scrambled eggs in a pan on the stove. Seeing me, she smiled and wiped her hands on her apron. "Good morning," she said happily. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, ma'am," I answered and climbed onto a chair at the table to watch her cook. She brought me over a small glass of orange juice and a piece of toast cut into triangles. "Breakfast will be ready soon," she said. "Everyone else is getting dressed and will be down shortly. I washed your clothes and I will get them for you after breakfast." About that time, my uncle came in from his den, poured himself a cup of coffee, and nodded at me as he drank it. Then he grabbed my aunt to hug her and give her a kiss before he went out the door to begin his day. I realized I had not even finished the bite of toast I started as he came into the room. He was gone like a flash. I also wondered why he had not taken the time to eat. Then I was surrounded by my cousins, all talking to me at the same time about the things they wanted to show me and do with me as they sat at the table. I did not know who to answer first and merely smiled and nodded at each of them in turn. It was nice to be among people who were happy to see me, and I was not used to the attention. My aunt set a huge plate of pancakes in the center of the table, followed by a plate of scrambled eggs, another of sausage patties, and finally a bowl with homemade pancake syrup. It was a feast, and this was just breakfast. When she sat at the end of the table, my cousins all held hands and included me and my aunt as she said grace. Then, as amen rang out around me, Forks began flying into the food as plates were filled, and I felt I should make sure and get some before it disappeared. I had never seen my cousins acting so unrestrained before this. I was used to their constantly being on their best behavior and talking in civil tones, but this morning, everyone was talking loudly and laughing, just like normal kids. After breakfast, we all helped to clear the table, and then my aunt sent me upstairs with clean clothes to get dressed. Since I knew we would be working in the garden, I made sure and put on the worst looking of my pants, so it would not matter if I was kneeling in the dirt. All of my shirts were about the same, so I grabbed one and put it on as I headed back downstairs. My aunt was in the laundry room gathering a basket and some pruning shears when I found her. She looked at my jeans with the stains on the knees and tattered holes in the thighs and frowned. Those jeans look like they need to be replaced, she said. Why did you pick them this morning? Uncle Pete said I was going to help you in the garden, so I made sure to wear pants that it would not matter if they got dirty, I said, looking down at them. I can change if you like. No, that'll be fine, she said and smiled. I think it was very responsible of you to plan your clothes for what we were going to do. Shall we go to the garden? She led the way out the back door and into the morning sun. I followed, considering what she had said. I was always told I was smart, but that was the first time anyone had called me responsible. I was not too sure how I felt about that, because I considered myself practical and carefree. A small yard surrounded the covered back porch, bordered on two sides by a tool shed to the side and a greenhouse to the back. The right side of the yard was open to the rest of the farm, with a driveway running beside the house to the garage a little way back. Across the driveway was a bit more yard, which ended at a wood fence. Beyond this, in all of its glory, stood the barn. It towered above the rest of the farm and seemed to be even larger than the house and yards combined. I looked up at the pulley and rope outside the second-story door, wondering if I could slide down that. I think the look on my face gave my thoughts away as I heard my aunt speaking to me. Let's go around into the garden now, she said, and led the way around the greenhouse. I was amazed. My aunt's garden was twice the size of mine, and this was just the regular section going back to the corn rows. The corn rows themselves took up as much space as my garden. She pointed over to the radish patch as she carefully stepped between the rows. We will start with the radishes, she said. Most of them have grown too large, but we will salvage what we can. No need to weed that area, as we will till it up after the good radishes are harvested. I entered the radish patch and began to pick radishes, putting them into the basket. There were red globe and white icicle radishes, as well as a whole row of horseradish, which I knew my uncle liked on sandwiches. As I worked, I watched my cousins pick up the sticks from the yard and then cut the grass with a push mower. It seemed to be a bit difficult as the grass was quite tall. I thought it was rather odd that they were using a push mower, but realized it was probably because it was much safer than a gas-powered mower, like I was used to. While one of them pushed the mower, the other two followed behind to rake the clippings into piles like hay. Then, every so often, they would bring a wheelbarrow around and pick up the piles to be deposited in the mulch pile at the rear of the garden. When we finished the radishes, we moved through the rest of the garden, picking peppers, tomatoes, peas, and green beans. We also pulled the weeds and cultivated the soil around the plants with small handheld rakes. Each vegetable was taken to the table near the garden where they were sorted into two piles, and the weeds went to the mulch. One pile went into the house for eating and to be canned, while the other went to the mulch pile, since it consisted of split radishes and overripe or bug-damaged vegetables. It was almost lunchtime when we finally finished, and my aunt asked me to help the others finish cutting the grass before lunch. Mark was happy to have help with the mowing, as the tall grass was tough to cut. I, on the other hand, was excited to use a tool I had never used before. It was not long before the novelty of the push mower faded, but thankfully, we were almost done by then. We put the last of the cuttings in the mulch pile, returned the tools to the shed, and went in to get cleaned up for lunch. Instead of just washing my hands, I was first instructed to get out of the dirty clothes, leave them in the laundry basket, and then wash up. After this, I was allowed to put on clean pants and shirt before joining them for lunch. There were grilled cheese sandwiches and hot soup for all at lunch. Really more than I was used to. Again, the meal was a happy time of talking and joking, but as I watched, I noticed it was also kept neat. If someone dropped a crumb or spilled a little drink, it was immediately cleaned up. I began to see how my aunt kept such a nice house and could definitely appreciate it. We were all shooed out of the house after lunch and told to stay outside until called for dinner unless there was an emergency. There was a bathroom in the garage we could use if needed, and the water hose would provide plenty of fresh drinking water. "Time for dessert," Mark said after his mom closed the back door to leave us outside. "Yeah!" Michael and Paul agreed, and all of them took off at a sprint around the greenhouse by the garden. Not to be left out, I quickly followed and was led to a large cherry tree. The entire tree was covered with dark red cherries. I joined in with my cousins as they picked handfuls of cherries to eat. They were delicious. The sweetest fruits I had ever eaten were the ones I picked for myself, and these were no exception. They were also very juicy, unlike the ones you get at a store. I placed a few of the pits in my pocket after eating the meat of the cherry. I had peach trees, elderberry trees, and grapes on the farm already, and thought it might be neat if I could grow my own cherry tree. Then, like my cousins, I could have cherries whenever they were in season. As I worked my way around the tree, selecting the very best fruits I could find to eat, I felt my shirt get snagged on something behind me. I turned to find raspberry bushes in a long line against the end of the greenhouse. The berries were large and ripe. I picked a few and ate them, amazed at how big they were as I put one on the end of my thumb like a cap. Having had our fill of fresh fruit, we wandered across the lawn in the direction of the barn. Once again, my eyes found the pulley and rope in the opening to the upper loft, and I wondered at the prospects of sliding down the rope. I followed my cousins around the barn and down a small hill into an opening in the back of the barn. I had not even realized there was a lower level to the building. We all went inside and were soon rolling around in the hay piled nearly to the ceiling. There was an open hatch above the pile, and Mark explained that the landlady would back a trailer under the hatch every so often to load hay and feed her livestock. In the meantime, the pile was used to mulch the garden and as a play place. There were several pitchforks hanging on the wall near the door, and I resisted the urge to play with them as I recalled my uncle's rules. Sure, he had not mentioned pitchforks, but they were a sharp tool, and I figured it would be best to refrain. Lying on my back on the hay, I looked up through the open hatch and saw there were a couple levels to the hay in the barn above us. Then I saw a ladder leading up to the very top of the barn. How could I resist? It was not a knife, nor fire, nor a power tool. Grinning to myself, I jumped up and ran around the barn, seeking a way in. There was a man door in the big barn door on the side of the barn. I went in through the door, followed closely by my cousins, and stopped to look up at the hay. There was a tool area under the back half of the barn which had a hard deck. On this hard deck, hay was piled up in progressive tiers almost all the way to the roof. I found the base of the ladder and climbed up to the first tier. Walking around on the hay bales, I thought it was pretty neat to be about 15 feet above the barn floor. My cousins had joined me and were all hanging about to see what I would do. I did not disappoint them. Back on the ladder, I was headed up to the next tier of hay, another 15 or 20 feet up. When I climbed up there, I found that only Mark and Michael had followed. Paul was down on the lower level of the hay, telling us it was way too high to be up there. I grinned at my cousins and returned to the ladder. Another 10 feet up, I was on top of the hay and could see an opening in the loft looking outside. I ran across to the opening and was disappointed to find there was no rope or pulley here. Looking behind me, I saw the opening in the other end of the barn where the rope was. It was a good 40 feet up in the air, and there was no ladder or catwalk to reach it. I wondered what it could be used for. Looking around, I realized that my other two cousins had not followed me up to the uppermost hay. I peeked over the edge and saw them looking up at me. "You guys coming?" I asked, smiling at them. "No, the hay is loose up there and needs to be restacked," Mark said. "We can see the hay here moving whenever you walk around. It might come tumbling down." I laughed as I thought about the hay tumbling. It would just fall to the next level, about 10 feet below, and it was further than that back to the edge where they could look down on Paul. Then I stood up and felt the bale at the edge I was just laying on begin to tip away from the pile. As it tried to roll out from under me, I saw my cousins' eyes first get wide as they realized the bale was falling, and their look turned to horror as I jumped off it toward them. I hope you enjoyed this look into the campaign at Fort Stix. That's all for now, but I'll be back again next week with another story, just for you. Until then, sleep well.